You ever wake up one morning and realize your peace and quiet, your little patch of calm in this world, just got locked up by people who think they own everything? Yeah, that's where this all started. I live out near the edge of town, where properties are wide, lakes are quiet, and neighbors usually keep to themselves. I'd saved up for years to buy this place. It's not flashy, but it's mine. And the best part? A narrow strip of land leading down to the lake. My lake entrance. My way to peace. Morning fishing. Skipping rocks with my niece. Just sitting there when I needed the world to shut up. But lately, something had changed. There were whispers at HOA meetings. A few side eyes, the usual passive-aggressive notes on the bulletin board. I didn't think much of it, until the day I came home and saw it. A shiny 6-foot black iron fence, bolted shut, blocking my lake access. And a sign, private HOA access only, key holders authorized. My name? Not on that list. I stood there, keys in hand, heartbeat climbing, staring at the fence that now stood between me and the thing I loved most about living here. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't about property lines. It was about power, about people thinking they could take something just because they had a board and a title, but they had no idea who they were messing with. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and whether your HOA ever crossed a line like this. Because this story gets a little wild. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept staring out the window, down the path that used to be mine. It felt personal, like they'd built that fence around me, not just a lake entrance. First thing in the morning, I called the HOA. Got bounced around between board members like a bad game of hot potato. Finally landed on a guy named Trent. Smug voice, called me, but like we were friends. I asked why a public easement, one that had been accessible to me since I bought the house, was suddenly locked up behind a gate. He barely paused. The HOA voted to restrict access for liability reasons, he said. Too many non-members using the path. I told him I was a member. I had been for 8 years. Right, he said. But technically, that trail cuts through property owned by another homeowner. So we made arrangements with him. Gate access is limited to board-approved key holders for safety. My jaw clenched. I knew exactly who owned that little triangle of land by the trail. An old guy named Mr. Hanley. Kept to himself. Moved into assisted living last fall. His property was supposed to be in probate. Still tied up in paperwork. The HOA must have swooped in fast. Quiet, underhanded, while no one was watching. So what now? I asked. You just fence off the lake and decide who gets to enjoy it? Trent gave a half-laugh. That's just how governance works, bud. And in that moment, with my blood boiling and my mind racing, I knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a land grab, cloaked in policy. And if they were going to play dirty, I could dig deeper. A lot deeper. I drove straight to the county records office. Not out of anger, out of principle. If they were going to throw ownership in my face, I wanted to see the paper trail. Took a little digging, but the clerk behind the desk helped me pull up the parcel details for Mr. Hanley's property. Sure enough, it hadn't transferred to the HOA. It hadn't even sold. It was still in Mr. Hanley's name. Probate was in progress, no buyer listed, which meant they didn't own the land the gate sat on. Not yet, but they were acting like they did. That's when something else jumped out. There was a note on the file. Flagged for auction. Quiet, local, sealed bid. Scheduled for the end of the month. A sliver of land. Long, narrow, mostly wooded, but running right alongside my trail. My access. And buried in legal description language I barely understood, I spotted a detail. The gate, the one they just installed, was right smack in the middle of that parcel. Not on HOA land. Not public land. Not even contested land. It was on a property going up for sale in less than 2 weeks. That changed everything. I asked the clerk if the auction was still active. She nodded, said only 2 bids had come in so far, both from organizations. My stomach turned. I knew one of those had to be the HOA, and I knew exactly what I had to do next. This wasn't just about access anymore. If they wanted to play chess with property lines, I'd become the player they didn't see coming. I walked out of that office with one goal, Win that land. Not just for me, for every single person who was tired of being pushed around behind closed gates. I spent the next week getting my ducks in a row. Met with a local attorney, a friend of my brother's, to make sure I wasn't stepping into legal quicksand. He looked over the parcel info, the auction terms, and grinned. They jumped the gun, he said. That fence, that key system, all installed on land they don't technically own. If you win the bid, you control the gate, and by extension, the whole narrative. I didn't need a bigger push than that. I filed my sealed bid the next morning, slightly higher than the estimated value, just enough to edge out whoever was behind those other envelopes. A few days later, I got a call from the county office. I'll never forget how calm the clerk sounded when she said, "Congratulations, Mr. Baker. You're now the owner of Parcel 221B. I hung up and just sat there in my truck, engine idling, hands shaking, not from nerves, but from the sheer satisfaction of flipping their plan on its head. I drove straight to the gate with a copy of the new deed in my glove box. And when I got there, HOA board president, you guessed it, Trent, was standing there with a clipboard, checking names off for authorized lake access. The look on his face when I held up the deed? Priceless. You fenced off my entrance, I said. But now, you fence yourself out of mine. I pointed to the lock. That key system you installed? It stays. But I'm the only one with the key now. He sputtered, red-faced, trying to form a sentence, but it was too late. The power had shifted. And Trent? He knew it. Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. One day I was just a guy at the end of the road with the quiet lake trail. And the next, I was that guy who bought the gate. People didn't know what to make of it. Some were furious, mostly the board loyalists who'd gotten used to calling the shots. Others? They pulled me aside at the mailbox or waved me over in the grocery store parking lot. "Good on you," one woman whispered, looking over her shoulder like she was afraid someone might hear. They'd been getting away with too much for too long. Trent and his crew didn't say much publicly, but you could feel the tension. Cold stares. Petty rules suddenly enforced on my lawn height. A noise complaint when I was pressure washing my siding. They were trying to box me in, punish me for playing their game and winning. But here's the thing. I wasn't breaking a single rule. I paid the taxes, filed the deed. I even printed laminated signs. Private property. Access by written permission only. One afternoon, a board member named Cheryl marched up with a clipboard, flanked by two neighbors like she was leading a mutiny. "This path was meant for community use," she snapped. "You're blocking years of tradition." I didn't argue. I just handed her a copy of the property survey with the county seal on it. "Tradition doesn't beat title," I said. She stormed off, and later that week, the HOA sent out a newsletter accusing me of dividing the neighborhood. But the funny thing, I didn't feel divided. I felt clear. They drew the line, and I bought the land under it. Simple as that. It hit me one night, late, long after the gate drama had quieted down for the day. I was sitting out back, beer in hand, watching the wind ripple across the lake. The moon was high, the air still, and for the first time in weeks, no one was yelling. No emails, no meetings, no signs taped to my door. Just me, the water, and the sound of frogs kicking up their nightly chorus. That's when it sank in what this whole mess had cost me. Not in money, in peace. This place used to be where I came to breathe. But ever since they threw up that fence, it had felt like I've been fighting just to exist on my own land. I never wanted to be the guy who made waves. Never planned to be the center of some property war. But what do you do when the people in charge stop listening? When they rewrite the rules to suit themselves and expect you to smile and nod? That fence wasn't just steel. It was a message. We decide what's yours now. And when I bought the land, I didn't do it to get even. Not really. I did it because I was tired of having my quiet stolen. Tired of watching power go unchecked. Tired of feeling like the only answer was to roll over. I looked down at the key in my hand, the one that now unlocked their gate. A weird mix of pride and sadness washed over me. I hadn't just reclaimed my path to the lake. I'd taken a stand. And in doing so, I'd drawn a line that couldn't be erased, even if they hated me for it. I could have kept it locked up. Left the gate as a quiet reminder of what happens when people push too far. And for a while, that's exactly what I did. The key stayed in my pocket. The trail stayed empty. The HOA stewed in their group chats and backroom meetings, trying to figure out how to spin it. But a couple weeks in, something unexpected happened. A neighbor, young guy named Jake, just moved in with his wife and baby, stopped by with a cooler of iced tea. "Hey," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "I know things have gotten tense. I just wanted to say, I think what you did was kind of badass." He grinned, nervous. "Would you maybe ever think about opening it back up to folks who treat it with respect?" That hit me harder than I expected. Because I'd been so focused on shutting the HOA out, I hadn't really stopped to think about who I might have shut in. Not everyone was part of the problem. Some of them were just caught in the crossfire. Decent people who never had a say in any of it. So that night, I walked the trail again, key in hand, thought about my niece skipping stones, my dad, and I casting lines off the edge, the way the water shimmered in the morning. And I realized this lake entrance wasn't just mine. It was part of what made this place home. I went inside, printed off a few forms, and the next day, I dropped them in a few mailboxes. Private lake access, request form, no board involvement, no nonsense, just neighbors. If they wanted in, all they had to do was ask directly, respectfully. I figured they'd react, but not that fast. Less than 48 hours after those request forms hit mailboxes, I got a cease and desist letter taped to my front door. Official HOA letterhead, cold legal jargon, accusing me of unauthorized use of common property signage, distribution of unvetted community agreements, and my personal favorite, soliciting unapproved neighbor involvement. I actually laughed when I read that one. Unapproved neighbor involvement? What even is that? But underneath the ridiculous phrasing was something real. They were rattled. My little move, a few printed forms and a direct invite to the people they claimed to represent, had poked the bear, and now they were clawing back. Hard. The next board meeting was, well, let's just say I wasn't exactly welcome with a fruit basket. I showed up early, copies of the deed and easement in hand, just to make sure there were no surprises. The room was packed. Fold-out chairs, hushed whispers. Every board member stiff-backed and staring. Trent cleared his throat. "We'd like to address the recent unauthorized activity involving private lake access." I let him go on. 5 minutes of puffed-up language, veiled threats, and dramatic pauses. When he finally finished, I stood up, calm as could be. "I own the land," I said. "The gate sits on my property. Access is granted at my discretion. If you'd like to challenge that, I suggest you do it through the county." Silence. No one moved. No one spoke. I nodded. Didn't think so. And I walked out. But I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They'd lost the land, and now they were losing control. That's the one thing HOAs can't handle. And when they start to crack, they crack loud. It started subtle. Little things. My trash can knocked over 3 mornings in a row. A citation for improper paint tone on my shed, even though it matched the exact code listed on their own website. A complaint about excessive weeds in a flower bed I had planted 2 weeks ago. Petty, predictable, but clearly targeted. The HOA wasn't done with me. They just shifted strategies. I ignored it as long as I could, but the last straw came on a Saturday. I woke up to the sound of drilling. Walked outside to see 2 guys in safety vests bolting a new signpost into the ground, right next to the gate. I marched down the trail, heart pounding, and read the fresh metal plate. Private HOA property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started filming. "You 2 got a permit for this?" I asked. They looked at each other, awkward. One mumbled, "We were just told to install it, man." I told them to stop. They didn't argue. They packed up and left. I took the sign down myself, careful not to damage anything, then emailed the HOA directly. One more stunt like that, and I will file a harassment claim. That afternoon, Trent showed up at my door. No clipboard, Just that same smirk he always wore when he thought he was smarter than you. "You've made your point," he said. "But if you think this ends here, you're mistaken." I leaned against the doorframe. "You already lost, Trent. You just can't stand that I didn't ask your permission." He stared at me a long second, like he was trying to figure out what move to make next. But there were no more moves. The board had overplayed its hand. And now, they were just flailing. The months that followed were quiet. Not peaceful exactly, but still, no more signs. No more fake violations. Just silence. A kind of cold, bitter retreat from the HOA board. Like they'd finally realized I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The gate stayed up, still locked. But my little access program, it grew. Slowly. Neighbors started knocking on my door, one by one, not with complaints, but with curiosity, with respect. Mind if my son and I fish down there next weekend? Would it be okay if I walked my dog along the path early mornings? Every request was met with a smile, a signature, and a gate code. No red tape. No committee votes. Just neighbor to neighbor, like it used to be. And funny thing, the ones who screamed loudest in the beginning, they never asked. They just stayed behind their fences, watching while the rest of us reclaimed something simple: community. The HOA didn't crumble, but it quieted. Elections came. Trent didn't run again. Word had gotten around about the stunt they pulled, the fence, the land grab, the retaliation, and about how they lost, not in court, but in credibility. I kept the deed framed in my hallway, not to gloat, just as a reminder that when someone tries to fence you out of your own life, sometimes the only move left is to buy the damn gate. People still talk about it around here. The guy who turned a key into a statement. And if I'm being honest, I'm proud of that. Not because I won, but because I stood up, because I stopped letting other people decide what I had access to. And in the end, that gate didn't lock me out. It locked them in,